let's talk about liquid units. I've got some Falcon tubes here with different amounts of salt. So here I've got 1 milligram of salt, and you can't really see this on the video, but it's a few grains of salt. Here I've got 1 gram of salt. You can see what that looks like. So that's 1 gram of salt, and then here I've got 32 grams of salt. So you can see what that looks like. So if I were to dissolve this salt in water, how much would I need for it to be harmful? How much would I need for, like if someone were to drink it, that it would actually do them some sort of harm? And how much would I need for it to taste bad? So what do you think you would need to consider if you were, trying to figure this out? So what qualities of something make it unsafe to drink? I would like for you to pause the video to think about this. So you may have come up with a list like this, right? So you might be thinking about the type of contaminant, the receptor. Is it a human, an animal, a plant? What about the length of exposure? Is it something for just a very short period of time? Or is it something that's going to be happening over a longer period of time? And then what is the concentration at which negative effects are seen? So this last one is what I really want to talk about today, concentrations. So I'm going to go over some examples of unit conversions and concentrations in liquids. And because this is really focused towards environmental engineers, I'm going to primarily be talking about water, because for the most part, environmental engineers are going to be working in water. So why would you need to know liquid unit conversions? Well, let's say, for example, you wanted to make sure some water is safe to drink. You may send that water to have it tested in a lab, and you may receive some results. What then? You could compare those results to drinking water guidelines set by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. But there might be a situation where the test results and the EPA guidelines or regulations are in different units, so you would need to do a conversion. Before I switch to doing math, I want to look at these Falcon tubes again. So here I have, so again, I've got 1 milligram, 1 gram, and then 32 grams. And you can kind of see how much that is. So if I were to dissolve it in 1 liter of water, okay, so this is a mass. If I dissolve it in 1 liter of water, we would have a concentration. So many contaminants are at significant concentration health-wise, even if it's just in the milligram per liter range. So if I were to dissolve this milligram of some sort of contaminant into this liter of water, even though that looks like a very, very small concentration, in a lot of environmental situations, that is quite significant, depending on the type of contaminant. If you're looking specifically at contaminants, if you were to look at the 1 gram per liter concentration, that is very, very high in many, many situations. So if you were to look at contamination in a river, and if you were to measure 1 gram per liter of, let's say, copper, that is very, very, very high. So for most contaminants, you're looking at about the milligram per liter range. And then finally, if I were to put this 32 grams of salt into water, that is very, very high concentration, and that would be approaching about the concentration of seawater. So let's do some math. Let's do some examples. So you've likely encountered many problems like this in your chemistry class. I don't want to rehash what you've done in chemistry, but I do want to show you a couple of examples that are a little more specific to environmental engineering. The first one is going to highlight a certain type of notation. So you measure nitrate in water, and you need to do this conversion where you are taking 1 milligram per liter nitrate as nitrogen and converting it to moles per liter of nitrate. So whenever you see this, this kind of notation where it's dash something, that means as measured. So basically, you can think about it, taking a measurement of only nitrogen, and then for other reasons, you know that it's nitrate. So that's really important when you're converting between milligrams and moles. So let's see. So we're going to take our 1 milligram per liter of nitrate measured as nitrogen. So 1 milligram per liter. I am going to end up using the atomic mass of nitrogen, so I need to convert this to grams. So there's 1,000 milligrams in a gram, and then I'm going to use the atomic mass. And so because we have this dash n, this measured as nitrogen, we're going to use the atomic mass of nitrogen. So that's 14 grams of nitrogen per mole. And when we do this, we end up with 7.14 times 10 to the negative fifth moles of nitrogen per liter. So you might want to, so then we need to convert it to nitrate. And you'll see here that 1 mole of nitrate has 1 mole of nitrogen. So we know that we've got 7.14 times 10 to the negative fifth moles of nitrate per liter. Okay. So just remember, if you ever do see this dash, some sort of compound dash an element, that means that's probably going to mean it's as measured. And if you're converting between mass and molar concentrations, you're going to need to use that element atomic mass, not the atomic mass of the entire compound. Our next problem is water contains 10 ppm benzene, and we need to convert this to milligrams per liter. So this idea of ppm is very, very common in environmental engineering and environmental sciences. And ppm means parts per million. Okay. Sometimes you'll see a subscript on that. So if you see ppm with a subscript of m, that will be parts per million by mass. You could also see ppmv, very common in air calculations, so that's parts per million by volume. But for each one of these, you can always just think of it as you have so many parts of one thing per million parts of everything. So in this example, we have 10 parts benzene per million parts total, but mostly water. So we can think about that as, we could think about that as 10 atoms of benzene per million atoms, or we could think of it as 10 moles benzene per million moles. I am going to think about it in this example as 10 milligrams of benzene per million, so 10 to the 6th milligrams total. Okay. And then if I look at that total, I want to eventually get this down in the denominator to be liters. So I'm going to convert that to kilograms first. So we've got 10 to the 6 milligrams in a kilogram. And then I need to use a density. So I'm going to use the density of water, which is 1 kilogram per liter, because this particular example isn't water. Okay, this is really important, okay? So realize that if you're ever converting between parts per million and a mass or molar concentration, you're going to need to use the density. And this is exceptionally important. Okay, so if you go through and you do all of this, what you end up with is 10 parts per million benzene equals 10 milligrams of benzene per liter. Okay. So what we see here is that 1 part per million is about equal to 1 milligram per liter. This is a very important thing to remember because it is very, very useful. But what you also need to remember is it's dependent on the density. So you can only use this relationship in dilute, aqueous solutions. Okay? Because it has to have a density of 1 kilogram per liter for this little shortcut to work. So water has that density. If you're using like petroleum or something, the density is not really going to be 1 kilogram per liter, so you're not going to be able to use this. I have a lot of students who like to use this delightful relationship in air, which is very, very wrong. You end up with an answer that is orders of magnitude off because the density of air is not 1 kilogram per liter. So very, very useful relationship, but only if you use it correctly. So remember it, and remember when to use it. Okay, so there are 2 examples. So I've done one example with this idea of, at this as measured concentration. So where you see some sort of ion most of the time, and it's dash some sort of element. That means that you have to use the atomic weight of that element whenever you're doing mass to molar concentration conversions. And then we did this example of parts per million, ppm, which we can very nicely just say ppm is basically equivalent to milligrams per liter, provided it's a dilute aqueous solution. So you should be able to convert between many different types of liquid concentrations, including mass and molar concentrations and parts per million, which I talked about here. You should also be able to convert between those in mass fractions and percents, and also equivalent concentrations, which I'll talk about in another video. So that brings me to the end of this installment of converting between liquid units. So remember, you might have to do this if you're trying to compare different numbers in different units, say some type of measurement to some sort of guideline or regulation. You might also find you need to do it if you're talking to someone in a different field. So, chemists tend to use different units than engineers, for example. At the end of this video, you should be able to convert between mass concentrations and mole concentrations, and also parts per billion. You should also know how to convert between those units and mass fractions and percents.